I'm Hal Marcus.
And I'm Memme Onwudiwe.
And this is a special edition of Meeting of the Minds, the legal AI podcast from Evisort.
We're here in the Workday studio for our first episode of 2026 with a special guest, Rich Sauer, Chief Legal Officer here at Workday. Please, Rich, if you could introduce yourself.
Excellent. I'm happy to, Memme. Thank you, Hal. Thank you, Memme, for having me. As you said, Rich Sauer, I'm the Chief Legal Officer here at Workday. I've been here now for just over 6 years in this role. And prior to Workday, I was at Microsoft I still can't believe it when I say it, but for 20 years, I was at Microsoft in a variety of different roles in the legal department, primarily in Seattle, but then I spent about 5 years in Singapore as well with them, playing a regional role. And then prior to that, I was at a law firm called Sullivan & Cromwell in Washington, D.C. So that's my quick background.
Rich, we're so glad to have you join us today. You know, we've been really gratified over the last year, and we've talked about this, about how this podcast has really grown in subscriptions, and we've had some episodes with over 10,000 downloads in one episode in particular. So it's really grown over 2025. During that year, Evisort, of course, became part of Workday. And every month we talk to thought leaders about what's going on in legal AI. And what we thought we'd do for this first episode of 2026 is take some of our most popular episodes, threw the transcripts into AI, and said, what are the 6 biggest themes that are emerging? A little bit of human in the loop. We edited a bit.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, this is what came up, and we thought this was right on point. So we're really glad to have you here. Get your thoughts on some of these things that we're looking at as big themes for 2026.
Love it. Sounds fun. Let's go. Let's go after it.
Awesome. Well, yeah, let's jump in. You know, the first theme that we saw come out as we were going through last year's podcasts was really the idea that the role of the general counsel, the role of being a legal leader, is becoming more holistic than just kind of the more traditional legal roles that legal leaders have typically fulfilled. We talked with folks who were, part chief people officers and part chief legal officers. We talked with folks who engage with the business at levels that would be unheard of for a traditional general counsel or chief legal officer. We actually, if we can roll the clip, one of our guest speakers last year, Brittany Leonard, who's actually an award-winning general counsel herself, had some really interesting thoughts when it came to how she was able to solve issues that might not seem fully legal on their face of them, but by leveraging more of these holistic skills.
Excellent. Let's take a look at the clip.
I remember getting an issue coming down the pipeline, and they're like, hey, there's nothing we can do. What's our worst case scenario here? We have exhausted all options. And I said, let me try. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, let me get a team together from different departments, from development to product to customer service. And I got about 8 different departments together, and we came together, we collaborated, and we fixed what was wrong and the problems that needed to be fixed. We ended up solving it in 6 weeks. And now they are one of the most loyal customers for that company at this time.
So, Rich, that means you got to tell us about all of the customers you have saved with non-legal solutions. Go ahead, list them off.
Well, listen, what I will say, I think Brittany's experience does sound very familiar to me. And I do think this is a trend. I think it's actually a trend that's probably been in the works for a fairly long time. I might be a little bit spoiled because having come from Microsoft and now at Workday, very much I think the legal department is looked at to do much more than your traditional, risk, identifying risk, mitigating risk. That is certainly a core part of what we do, but it's only a part of what we do. In fact, it's funny, when I started at Workday, I think it's still this way. When you start, you go to new employee orientation. It's almost a full day, and I did it actually right here in this building. And one of the sections they had during that onboarding was they broke us in. It was probably about 50 of us that started that day. They broke us into 4 groups, and they gave each of us part of the company. Each group had part of the company. And you had to sort of read a memo about what that part of the company did, and then present back to the assembled group. And I ended up being with the product and technology group, so I had to present on what the product and technology did at Workday. And a different group had the G&A functions, so legal and HR and finance. And when the group that presented about legal, what they said was, well, legal's, their job is primarily, compliance and to make sure the company doesn't do anything wrong. And I thought to myself, gosh, I'd like to think we do more than that. So a big part of my focus when I got to Workday was really focusing on how do we help drive growth and unlock innovation for the company. And so we actually organize ourselves around 3 core pillars. One is absolutely, one is that, driving growth, unlocking innovation. A lot of our go-to-market lawyers who support sales are working in that function. A lot of our product team is working in that function. We have another core pillar called protect and defend, and that's probably the more traditional thing you think about when you think of a legal department. Super important part of what we do, and we do that extraordinarily well. Then we have a third pillar, which is all around earning stakeholder trust, and that is basically tying a lot of those pieces together. But then, talking to our customers about what we do on privacy or responsible AI and the approach we take to developing AI, because it's so core to driving the company forward and it's core to all of our strategies. So absolutely share Brittany's point of view 100%. And I think that's exactly where the legal departments are going.
Yeah. When I think about, though, maybe less experienced legal leaders, right, who might be uncomfortable going past just the kind of legal analysis that's maybe gotten them so far, and they now need to flex these new muscles to kind of go to the next steps of their careers, any advice for maybe folks in that uncomfortable part of their legal career?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the core things, I think, is it's sort of building that relationship. And so partly at all levels of the company, what you try and do is you want to be part of that business. They usually have a leadership team or some group that comes together that runs that division. You should be there. You should be at that table with them. You should get to know them on a personal level, get to build trust and build some sort of stakeholder equity with them. I think is really important, and it makes that a lot easier. You're more comfortable sort of stepping in. But it's part of your journey, I think, as a developing lawyer, and you get better at it over time. And it's also one of those skills, to be honest, that I don't think AI is ultimately going to replace anytime soon.
Which raises an interesting point. This isn't specifically, obviously, a theme around legal AI, but legal AI plays a big role in this. Do you see legal AI as making it easier to be pro-business and playing a broader role within the business, or does it make it harder?
Probably one thing that it probably does is it turns your clients into sort of practicing lawyers. They'll use AI to do some of the research. They'll come back, wait a minute, you said this, but I read something online or I did some research on my own. So you have to deal with that at some points in time. But I think to the extent that it helps you just move quicker, be more conversant, get information at your fingertips, I think it actually largely helps you.
I doubt there's any doctors watching, but if there are, I'm sure they're like, yeah, we know.
Yeah, exactly.
So that brings us to our second theme, which is all about the role that AI plays in assisting attorneys or having some other impact on what they do. So those people that have been brought in-house to leverage all of those skills. And that theme that was emerging that we heard from a lot of our guests was that AI is a great enabler of routine tasks, not a replacement. So the clip we're going to play on this one is from possibly my favorite episode of the year because she was so much fun to talk to. Christine Custodio Suero, who was California Paralegal of the Year in 2020, works at a law firm, teaches paralegal skills in school, and just had great commentary on her approach to leveraging AI within the firm. So let's play that clip.
Okay.
There was a large media outlet that was looking for paralegals to go on record about how artificial intelligence was going to decimate our profession entirely. And I said, whoa, let's pump the brakes on that death spiral narrative. And let's revisit this from a different lens and context. And let's say, it's here. How do we use it professionally, ethically, and responsibly within our workflows? Paralegals tend to be the early adopters or the early users of technology. And we test, demo, right? And we bring it into our legal ecosystems.
Suraj, how does that comport with your experience?
First of all, I understand why you love that episode. I mean, that energy and the positivity that she exudes, she's amazing. I could see why she's Paralegal of the Year in California. I think she makes valid points. I do think the technology, it's incredible, and it's the pace of innovation and change it's daunting. So I don't know, it's hard to predict where this is ultimately going. I would say in my experience, like when I think of the use of AI in the legal department here at Workday, it started with generative AI, and that became a great tool to get you started on drafting and help you be creative. But it never replaced anything. It was just sort of it was an aid, an important aid, and continues to be an important aid today. Then we moved to agentic AI and the use of agents, and we're sort of at the department. We're on the verge of using agents now to sort of help us, which I think the thing that they can be really helpful for is in training and enablement. We spend a lot of time putting together materials for our clients across the company, things that they can turn to for self-help. But oftentimes they just don't read them. They don't take the time. It's easier for them just to, they know somebody in the legal department, they've got a relationship, they just pick up the phone and they call or they send an email. And we're at a point where we're getting bigger. The pace of work is picking up. It's very fast. We have to get more efficient. And so I need people to resort to self-help more than they do today. And so I think these agents can be really helpful to the extent that they can ingest this content. They can become that. If you want to talk to somebody, if you want to reach out to somebody, if you want to send somebody an email, they can be the front end essentially for the legal department. So I'm excited about where that goes. But, will it replace people? I do think it will replace some people. And I'll go back to an example that will be near and dear to your heart, which is 4 years ago, long before we acquired Evisort, we were an Evisort customer. And the use case that we came to you for, that we desperately needed at that time, is we had contracts all over the place, but we weren't sure what was in them. And when questions would come up within the company, they'd say, hey, I want to go and provide customer support out of India. Can I do that? And we'd say, oh, we know that there are some customers that we promised that we would only provide their support out of the US or out of Europe or someplace else. Who remembers who they were? And that would be a job of a paralegal or a contractor or somebody to come in and spend time going and identifying those. And then we were able to do that in 10 minutes after we implemented Evisort. So that person's job who would have done that work and probably spent 2 weeks doing it for us, hopefully is then able to do other higher value work. But it is eliminating tasks. Let me put it that way. It may not be replacing lawyers or replacing paralegals, but it's certainly eliminating parts of what they used to do and spend a lot of time doing. And if they were an outside lawyer, they were spending a lot of time billing for those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious at the human level, right? Because, there's still a lot of fear, I think, with lawyers and using these kinds of technologies. As you're beginning to kind of have more folks on your teams leverage these tools, how do you make folks feel comfortable that their jobs aren't at risk and to see them as kind of beneficial to them completing tasks versus risk towards their careers? Yeah,
I don't know if I'd like to say we're doing a good job of that, but I do, the feedback loops come in that there is some level of concern within the department where people worry about that as a concern. I forget the adage, but it's something like the AI is not going to replace lawyers. It's going to replace lawyers who don't know how to use AI or something along those lines. Something much more eloquent and better said than that. But I do think that's true. And so the interesting thing about the legal department at Workday, we track this. We have a program called Everyday AI that is the entire company subscribes to, and it's our effort to skill up everybody, get them comfortable using AI tools. The legal department is the number one adopter of AI at Workday. Gemini is primarily the tool that I think we use the most, but we use it considerably. So we are working really hard to train people, give them that skill, get them comfortable with it, and then hopefully make them not as fearful about what it might result in.
It's a real issue and a very fine line, and not one we should gloss over. I often come back, and we've chatted about this. I often come back to my experience where I spent a lot of my post-practice career focused on e-discovery.
Right.
And that was some of the earliest use cases we were seeing for legal AI. But the work that it was replacing, was 100 attorneys in a room at relatively low wages, looking at advertisements in emails that couldn't possibly be relevant, but we didn't have better means of filtering out to the relevant content. So in the short term, it certainly had an impact. I mean, instead of 100 attorneys in the room, you got 25, and they're looking at much better content. But the industry effectively absorbed it in many ways because that reduced the cost of discovery, which could increase the scope of discovery, which could mean that it's possible to enforce your rights in another litigation that you couldn't afford otherwise based on the amount of reward you were looking at, and on and on. The question is sort of, will we see that same dynamic play out with generative AI, or is it just too much too fast?
I have to believe so, because what I always tell people is you have to sort of self-govern. I don't know if this is true of the legal profession globally in all industry sectors, but it's certainly true in the technology sector, that there is an unlimited amount of things that I could spend my time on. It's unlimited. And I just, at some point, I have to say, I'm now done. I've spent enough time today doing the work I need to do. I'm stopping now. There's a ton of unfinished business that I won't get to. And tomorrow I'll wake up and I'll start again. And there will always be this unfinished business. So to the extent that I could find a tool that makes me more efficient to be able to get more of that done and be more productive, that's fine. But I can't envision a world where it's like, gee, it's 5 o'clock and I have nothing left to do. There's nothing I could turn to. I mean, I just don't think that's happening. The other thing I'd say on this topic is the worst lawyers, I think, are the ones that come in and say, I know the rules. I'm an expert in this area. I know the law, and here's what you must do, client. You must build this thing to this platinum level. That's sort of like, to me, the easiest. It's like that's the easiest part of the job. It's just, okay, you read the statute, you've interpreted the statute somewhat narrowly or conservatively, and now you're dictating onerous rules on this, on this client to get them to do something. I don't spend my time doing that. I spend my time saying, well, here's this law. It's not entirely clear what it means. It could be interpreted 10 different ways. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. Like instead of being very narrow and conservative, could we interpret it this way and maybe still be able to unlock this business opportunity? There is some risk. It's going to be, more risk than if we did the conservative thing, which is often just to not do anything because the conservative point is like, don't try anything, just stay home and sit in your chair.
You're back to that department of no.
The department, exactly. So it's like you're just constantly making these balancing risk decisions. And I don't think it also could be like like an arbitrage thing where you just sort of every risk gets weighted and you just pick. But because it's like there truly is an art to doing that I don't think AI, well, at least the versions that I've seen in the current state and where they're going, are going to be able to replace.
Well, that's coming out next week.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'll be comfortable for the time being.
As we're talking about, how you're empowering, the lawyers that are working under you today, another theme that came out as we were reviewing some of last year's great podcasts was the idea of some of these softer human skills, usurping or even trumping some of the more kind of hard, legal skills that we've seen be so important. This was really underlined in the conversation with LaTanya Langley. She's both the chief legal officer and chief people officer at Edgewell Personal Care, and she had some really interesting thoughts about the growing importance of some of these more human soft skills. If we can roll the clip.
And then for young lawyers, really honing in on their unique human skills are going to be essential. There are skills that we have as individuals that no machine can replicate. And so if you continue to focus in on those skills, and then you remain adaptable and you're continuously learning about these tools, there are benefits to having this digital workforce to drive innovation and growth, as long as you're reminded about the importance of the human aspects that are still needed.
As LaTanya spoke about, especially as there's more and more of a digital workforce with agents coming in, people are curious about the importance of the more kind of human skills that we can uniquely bring. If you could speak a little bit towards that.
Yeah, I think they're irreplaceable. And I think Tanya mentioned they were important skills for young lawyers to hone, and I think they're important skills for lawyers of any age to hone, and they will continue to be important for, time on end. Things like trust, empathy, those sorts of things. I don't think technology could replace. I think another concept that I think her comments touch on is also just the importance of there being the quote unquote human in the loop when you're dealing with AI. It's a bedrock principle that we have at Workday. It's particularly with any of the technology that strays into areas that might be considered moderately or high risk areas. It needs human oversight, and I don't see that ever changing either. I mean, it's an important component of how you need to develop and think about using these products for sure.
So, Rich, you work with HR professionals, with finance leaders, the whole C-suite, as Workday does. I mean, is this so different for legal? Are these particular needs for soft skills, or are they really the same across every department, or do you see some special aspect of how it impacts legal?
That's a good question. I think they're probably universally true. I mean, like I'm a big fan of people there's Patrick Lencioni or Keith Ferrazzi, and a lot of what they're more sort of talk about team leadership and management, things like that. But everything that they start with is all about building those relationships of trust. I think those are just so important to everything, to get anything done, whether it's internally collaborating with peers, if it's a client relationship that a lawyer would have, you need to develop that sort of solid bedrock trusted relationship to be able to do anything else that follows to be able to do it well.
I guess this begs one more question, and you probably have a strong perspective on this from the work you've done at Harvard. But are we educating the next round of attorneys? And it's going to be a big round based on what I see with applications at law schools these days. I mean, are they getting that sort of core education, do you think?
Memme will have a better answer than me because he's closer to it than I am. It's been a long time for me. I will tell you, we certainly didn't when I went to law school.
Oh, wow.
And you also, we certainly, I don't even think you did it when you got out of law school. But it was sort of I think the environment was very much, the quote unquote sink or swim type of
we didn't even have
environment.
mentors at my firm that first year.
Yeah.
But what do you see? I mean, you've done work at Harvard on this front, educating on technology and entrepreneurship. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that more and more folks are realizing the importance of having more of these technical skills and being able to use these different technologies. But when it comes to, we always say AI is going to free you up for what? But the thing you're being freed up for is being able to be more persuasive, is being able to build relationships when you need to have tough conversations with the C-suite. You can do so in a way that allows you to have kind of goals that need to be had, right? And so I think that while we're arming folks to do these more tactical tasks quicker, to your point, there needs to be more of a training of folks on kind of the ethical responsibilities of being a lawyer, which are only going to increase. But then also, these softer skills of being able to achieve your goals without always just leaning on hard black and white text, because there's less and less of that as we move into more of these obscure times.
Yeah, and David Wilkins and Scott Westfall at Harvard do an amazing job. They're out in front, I think, on this issue, teaching a course about the actual profession of the law. Mm-hmm. It's super interesting work, and it's, I don't know of anybody else who's doing that kind of work, and I think it's important, and I wish more people were doing that.
Yeah, they do a great job. These two I know. The two you mentioned earlier, I was just nodding. I had no idea. if we haven't interviewed them, I don't know them.
Okay.
No, I'm always enthused to see that starting to find its way into the education. I think it's still early stages, but I do think we're seeing that change the last few years. Yeah. And I don't think we really saw very much of it until the last few years.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting that's happening, I think, in legal departments is the skills. The different skill sets that you're seeing now in departments. Like we have in my team, we've got data scientists now as part of the team. We have social psychologists as part of the team. We have a psychologist as part of the team. Most of those are on what we call our responsible AI team, and they spend their days and nights sort of making sure that we're both deploying and developing technology that is safe and responsible and explainable and clear. But it's the skills that I would have not have thought of you'd ever see in a legal department anytime, in the past.
So speaking of responsible AI, that brings us to the fourth big theme that emerged from our episodes in 2025. We heard from a lot of our guests about the importance of the role that lawyers play within the organization on ensuring that adoption of AI throughout the org is responsible. This came up often, but the quote that we're going to play on this one is from our December episode with Kimberly Odoms. She is counsel for IP and AI at IEEE. How's that for a few acronyms all at once?
Well done.
And she has a copyright specialty and focus, but she has veered into really delving into AI. And she had some interesting commentary about how they approach that within, as it happens, a standards organization, IEEE, where they take this kind of thing very seriously. So let's hear what Kimberly had to say.
So we were very vigilant. We kept a close eye and a close watch on what was happening in industry and just in the world at large. We communicated with our staff and said, hey, whenever there were updates, there were updates. Now we've kind of shifted away from that now that we've had time and we have more information. So it's not you cannot use AI. And I always say, as legal, I'm not the department of no. I'm the department of yes, but. Yes, you can do this, but this is how you should do it, or this is the recommendation.
Better than the department of it depends.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, the defense. But yeah, we've shifted into understanding that AI is not going away. We know that folks are using it. This is how you can do it safely, which I always advocate for creating a safe sandbox space, for example, for folks to kind of test and dabble with AI safely. Because even outside of my organization, I always say folks are using it anyway, right? There's like, BYO AI, bring your own AI. You can tell folks that, no, you cannot use it. You can even block it on your network. Folks have phones. They're using it, right? It's like you can't take the salt out the soup. Once people know that this thing exists and they've used it, they're going to use it if they believe it can make them more efficient, if they believe that it can help them complete a task faster.
So Rich, as CLO for an organization that is very pro-AI, that's AI first, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was super. That was a great clip, super clip. Liked a lot of what she said, and she's absolutely right. I mean, if you try and block it and say absolutely no, everyone's going to find a way around it. So that's not, you say the same thing about security. If you make it so impossible to sort of, get on, access your laptop because you've put 27 security, protections around it, it's, people are going to find ways around it. So you got to find something that works for the company. When we first started, when, ChatGPT emerged and generative AI was the thing and everybody wanted access to it, we did get on top of it pretty quickly. We didn't block it, but we did try and catalog it. So and inventory it, I guess, is in some ways, because partly it was a cost related thing, because it was, people had the ability to go out and spend. So we had people spending in multiple different places, essentially buying the same tools, but buying them 27 different times. And we said, look, we can drive a better price. We can go get enterprise licensing. We can get enterprise grade AI software that would protect privacy and things like that. So we got in front of it quickly and put those sort of rules in place. But then we have maybe a slightly different challenge than what Kimberly has, is that we're a developer of AI as well as a deployer. We deploy it internally for our own use, but we also develop and sell it. So our focus went very quickly to, what are we selling to our customers? Let's make sure we're selling, responsible, trusted, ethically sound AI. So our efforts went there, and we kind of took our eye off the ball a little bit internally. And now we've come back to it. So we're putting more governance in place. We have a great partnership with our business technology team, and they actually were doing a lot of good work on their own in this area. Have worked with them on an intake process. So as we have a process where people who are using AI will summarize what they want to do with it. We can then assess it quickly and determine, hey, is this a risk? Is there risk associated with this? If there's risk, doesn't mean you can't do it. Just means we need to help curate the process, give you some guidelines and some guardrails to make sure you do it well. So we've plugged that into the BT process of whenever anybody's procuring, we can be right there early in the process and identify it. And the other thing I'd note is, this is a requirement now under the EU AI Act. I mean, deployer ethical AI is part of that. So it's not just a good, smart, sensible thing to do. It's actually a requirement that it's something you must do.
I'm curious on the side of us developing new AI capabilities. You already talked about the fact that your team's expanded. You have social sociologists, right?
Yeah.
Was it
Social
psychology?
psychiatrists,
Social
yeah.
psychiatrists and
Data
data
scientists,
scientists
yeah.
on the team as well. What's it look like kind of reshaping a global legal team for the age of responsible AI where you need new skills? What's that look
Yeah,
like?
I was fortunate because when I was at Microsoft, I would about every 3 or 4 years they'd pick me up and put me into a new job. And it was always something I had no background or experience in, knew nothing about. So the first year I felt stupid every day coming into work until I finally would figure it out and then ultimately have some semblance of success.
This is because you had soft skills. They knew that you could
I,
do
I,
this.
I don't know why they kept moving me around. My last role there, I was running the responsible AI team, and so that was very focused on use cases. And at the time, facial recognition was the big AI application that was kind of hot and interesting, but also fraught with peril. And so we would look very closely at what are we? Here's a customer that wants to buy it. What are they going to use it for? And we would say no. No, that's not a use. It's not ready for that. We're not going to sell it for that use case. When I came to Workday, I knew we had a set of principles in place, and the principles are great and they're helpful, and lots of companies have them, and lots of the principles look similar. But that's kind of the easiest part, is to write the 4 or 5 principles. It's the harder part is then how do you implement those and put those into practice? And so that's when we started the Responsible AI team, I think all the way back in 2019. And it's growing today to be really an important part of the company. Kelly Trindle is a PhD who leads that department. She came out of the EOC where she was a data analyst, and she's got a great background for us because in our space in HR, one of the biggest risk areas for us is bias and fairness. And that's something we have to look at very carefully, and we have to test for, and we have to pay a lot of attention to. And she's perfect for that role.
And since, Kimberly's part of a standards organization with IEEE, I guess it makes sense to inquire about the standards that you think are meaningful around AI adoption.
Ooh, that's a really good question.
I'm very proud of that one.
Yeah, as you should be. I think we tend to anchor probably on 2 bookends that we look at. One is the EU AI Act, which is the leading piece of legislation that's out there. The other is the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, which is the U.S. sort of corollary, I guess I would call it, to the EU AI Act. And we have a government affairs team that spends a lot of their time, particularly at the state level in the United States, trying to help shape and influence legislation. And we're trying to sort of, when we do that, we go out and we basically advocate on behalf of these 2 existing laws, and we're trying as best we can to try and move everything into a similar, harmonize is too much to hope for, but a framework I think that would largely look similar. And those are helpful for us because it's a risk-based framework, it's a sensible approach to it, and so I think those are the guideposts. ISO standards is another place to look. ISO 42001 is an important standard. I know we've embraced it, we've adopted it. Those are very important often for our customers. They're going to want to look for that. That's almost sometimes they'll have those sorts of things as kind of like that's your ticket to entry. Like that's they'll have a checklist like, are you ISO certified in this regard? And so that's an important thing to look to as well.
Shifting gears a little bit. When we think about the Meeting of the Minds podcasts, a lot of folks here come for a contract talk. It's a contract pun, Meeting of the Minds.
Yeah.
And, one of the themes that came out as we were looking at last year's podcast was that the age of folks seeing contracts as bespoke legal documents beginning to fade, and more folks seeing them as valuable business drivers across the organization. Really is something that's more cross-collaborative across an organization and something that has value far beyond legal. And so wanted to dig into that a little bit with actually a clip from an episode we did with Mark Ross, who's the principal at Deloitte Legal Business Services, which in itself is showing the kind of transition of how folks are seeing, contracts and legal, the fact that Deloitte's getting involved these days, right? But he had a really interesting, actually some really interesting thoughts around the value of contracts in today's business environment. If we could listen to it real quick.
I think that's one of the incredibly exciting impacts of generative AI and agentic AI, providing the organization with dynamic, query-specific information points based on subsets of contracts, portfolios of contracts, that those insights can then enhance the organization's negotiation strategy. It can suggest negotiation strategies based on those insights. That can be truly transformative to the enterprise.
So Mark really laid out a unique vision for where AI and agentic and agents can take the role of contracts within legal departments, beyond how they've traditionally been seen. Would love to have your take on that.
I loved what he said. I'm like, I want to go back and watch that whole episode again. It's interesting. I don't know if that's a vision of the future or a statement of today. I would say for most companies, contracts are an underutilized asset. They are, they get signed, they get thrown into a file cabinet and pulled out rarely ever again, which is a mistake. And we're like, what we're finding with the use of Evisort and the opportunity that it's opened up for us is we're doing things. I mean, and I wouldn't say, I don't know that we're unlocking as much value as Mark had talked about.
Well, it's just because his English accent and enthusiasm makes it sound big. You're doing fine.
But we're getting way more efficient. Like we're doing things like my example earlier. I mean, we're able to sort of, just save a ton of time by having to, instead of having armies of people pour over contracts to go figure something out. What did we do in the past? We can do it instantaneously. That's that's kind of the starting point. And then from there, we've been building. What we're able to do is once we sign a contract, we'll immediately load it into Evisort. And then we will take and we'll look for these key terms within the contract. And then what we do is we automatically pre-populate them into our Salesforce record. And that doesn't sound on its face like, well, okay, good for you, have fun. But what it does, and this is for the finance department primarily, but people today, prior to us doing this, when they wanted to know, like, what are the payment terms on this contract, they'd have to go, oh, there's the PDF, click open the contract, go to paragraph 42, here are the payment terms. Now it's all of it's right there in the record. So the amount of, just the time saving of that efficiency, I think, is huge. So we're sort of probably 2 steps behind Mark, where we're realizing efficiencies, we're getting smarter, we're moving into redlining, which is going to be even greater and more efficiencies and sort of clause libraries that we could drive. But I look forward to that vision and getting to that point too, where it really does unlock all that value that is I'm sure there.
Yeah, I think the piece that he's getting to that I find interesting, and for us, that was just sort of a great validation of something that we hear internally a lot, particularly from Jeff Piper, who heads our customer services and implementations. And he's been doing this for, quite some years. He was a pioneer in AI-powered CLM. And the idea is start with what you have. Yeah. So many companies will begin with, all right, well, we need workflows. We need to replicate what we're doing in manual workflows, make them much more efficient. And we could do that. But shouldn't you start by looking at all of your contracts, understanding what's in them, and then seeing what your workflows should be about? Yeah. What are the things you should be guiding toward? And that should inform your workflow strategies. And now where we're getting to in sort of the next round of this is that should be a continuous loop. It's not just a one-time thing. Yeah. You should always be getting that feedback now on what is working and what isn't working, and updating and improving your workflows as you go.
I think it makes a ton of sense. And what is common, like it can help you with your negotiation strategy. And I could see how that could be. Now that you have everything there, it's all in one place, it's searchable, it's organized, to be able to all right, let's go look at what happened here. What are the things that are, what are we spending all this time on? What's slowing down what we call sort of cycle time? We're always trying can we get through these contracts more quickly? Can we move faster? Being able to now look at that data set and use the analytic capability of AI to understand that, I think, can be really powerful.
Later on in that interview with Mark, he actually predicts the potential rise of a chief contracts officer in the future, since the role of contracts in organization would grow so much and be so important. Have you seen anything like that? Do you think that's something that could be on the horizon?
I think a lot of I think the role of the legal ops department has become considerably more significant. I think in the past it was kind of like they're helping us with our bills, with outside counsel billing or things like that. They're doing something else. I'm not sure what they're doing over there, but I'm sure it's important. Now they have this very prominent role. I mean, because they're helping us, implement things like Evisort, implement AI, use tools to get us to be faster. I mean, maybe someday. I mean, I'm sure the title will soon emerge. Whether it's truly a C-suite role, I guess maybe time will tell. And it probably depends on the company and what is it that they do and how significant is the contract to what they do, which is, I mean, at every company it's significant. I mean, it's essentially, it represents the promise that you're making to customers and what you're expected to deliver. And if you don't deliver on those promises, it's, you're not going to be in business very long. So it's absolutely central. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what the future brings.
Well, speaking of what the future brings, that brings us to our final big theme of the year, and it is right on point, and that's a big one, which is that we heard from a number of our guests that they feel we may be approaching a real tipping point in the whole sort of business model around legal services and how they operate based on the impact of legal AI. So for this one, let's turn to probably the best example of it is from Bjarne Telemann, who is the CEO and founder of Fjordstream Advisors. He's been GC at multiple companies. He's literally written the book on how you create a really powerful and effective legal team. He had some really interesting comments on this. Let's play the clip.
There was an interesting Axiom survey that came out just a short while ago of general counsel. And it was the first survey I've ever seen where 100% of the respondents, 100% said that they had regretted using a law firm for a matter as a result of quality, cost, or other issues. 100%. Something like 89% felt that law firms were no longer an adequate solution to their problems. And something like 79% were facing budget cuts in the last year. When you kind of put those two things together, you've got an industry that is charging record rates, client base that is deeply unhappy, partly because they're under pressure, right? The budgets that they're being cut, and technology that's moving at an exponential pace up the value chain and able increasingly to do more and more. To me, that sounds a lot like Kodak in the 1970s inventing digital photography and then putting it in the drawer and saying, it'll never replace film.
So, Rich, I'm not going to ask you to trash all of our outside counsel, but fascinating survey results, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty compelling stuff in terms of maybe we're getting to a point where you combine what legal AI is bringing to the fore. You add into that ALSPs, alternative legal service providers, legal, LPOs and all of that. And this perhaps growing dissatisfaction with the traditional business model for outside legal counsel. What are your thoughts?
I think it's super interesting. And I think I think he's right. And I think in that full clip, which I watched, he also does make the point, and I would agree with this too, which is there are definitely firms. This isn't news to firms. Firms understand this. They're thinking about it. They will themselves. Some will transform, some won't. But there are a number of firms that are thinking hard about it. They have innovation advisory boards and things like that they've put in place. And so I think they're working through what it means. But I think it will change the dynamic. There are some things like no one at Axiom asked me to take that survey. If they'd given me the survey, I'm probably not a good candidate to fill it out because I have a limited slice of what I do with the firms. There's people on my team that would be better to be surveyed.
You would have been the outlier.
I would have been the outlier.
Would have just cut off to keep the 100%.
But the reason I would have been the outlier is because mostly my engagement with my law firms right now tends to be on big and significant litigation matters, and that feels like, well, I don't know that there's going to be an AI bot that goes into any district court in the Northern District of California and argues a case on our behalf. So that feels like if I'm a litigator and that's what I do and I'm a trial lawyer, I think I feel pretty good about my job. Now, there's people that support me in my role that are helping me draft briefs and things like that. That's going to be transformed. That's going to be more, there's going to be a lot of AI impact, I think, there. I think to the days of having to go like, gee, we need a 50-state survey or we need a 27-country survey on what's the law in this area so that we can figure out what to do, and let's go hire a law firm to kind of use their network and give us a big memo on that. Yeah, that if that was what I did every day at a law firm, I'd be a little nervous because that feels like that's probably AI is going to do that pretty well pretty soon.
No, that's a good idea of kind of the shrinking scope of kind of that high level legal work that law firms are going to be doing for folks. I wonder how much of this is like hyperbole. I know people have been talking about the billable hour going away since before I was born, frankly.
Yeah. I got to jump in on that one then, because this is it was 25 years ago, and I know that because it was the year 2000, easy to remember. First time I sat on a panel at like a major legal industry event. And so these much more experienced people around me, including Monica Bay, who was the editor of Law Technology News at the time, and others, all predicted when
Billable
asked.
hours are going away.
Within 5 years.
Really?
The end of the billable hour. And I was like, okay,
yeah,
that'd be cool. But I mean, 25 years ago, we haven't seen much of an impact.
Look, I have sympathy for them. Like, we'll hire a law firm to do something and we think it's this, and it turns into being a whole, it takes 10 different turns and all that. So being able to do things in a predictive fashion, I think is hard. Now, when we do M&A work today, we generally do that with a flat fee. We sort of do some scoping with our outside counsel. We think this is this kind of a deal. What do you think? Here's the price, and so we've worked it out then. But you're right. We're a long way away from that prediction coming true.
Well, Mark Ross had an interesting take on this, and it kind of ties in with Bjorn Tillman too. Two things can be true. You can have an industry that is fiercely resistant to change and has proven that over many years, and at the same time is transforming itself in meaningful ways, even if it doesn't find its way to that bottom line. And Bjorn had a comment about how, and it became the title of our episode, nothing changes until suddenly it does.
It does, yeah.
So that was an interesting way to look at it. Do we build up to a point where suddenly a major firm abandons the billable hour and goes a whole different route, and a lot of other firms follow?
I wouldn't. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I just having I've lived through some. I mean, when I first started practicing law, we did not have computers. Everything was a yellow legal pad, and long. It was, and there was a word processing department, and then that quickly changed, and then we saw the advent of technology come in.
I think ultimately more has changed than we give it credit to. I mean, the rise of legal departments. You didn't have hundreds of people in legal departments like the way you do now.
Yeah,
you didn't have ALSPs who can do your NDA review and send it overseas or do all these different things, right? Even like kind of headhunting for legal, right? You didn't have Deloitte in the conversations with, legal operations and such, right? So I think a lot actually is different. We might see a lot of things manifest with the actual business practices of law firms changing, but just about everything else has changed all around them. So
well, and the rise of the in-house legal department too. I mean, I think they've gotten larger and bigger. And it's funny when I look at our department, and I look at our outside spend versus sort of our payroll, we're about 70% of our budget is spent on people, and about 30% of it is spent outside. And that tends to be, I think most departments it's more 50-50, and I think in part we've been somewhat, we have not had a lot of big litigation, which once you start to get a lot of big cases, I think that changes that balance a little bit.
Well, we were going to take all the credit for that with Evisort.
And that's also part of it, I'm sure. I'm certain. Okay. I'm certain.
Well, those were our 6 big themes from 2025 as we look ahead into 2026. So looking ahead to 2026, let's wrap up with a quick lightning round here. What is something that perhaps we didn't cover that you are looking at as a big theme for what's coming up in the coming year? Maybe let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm excited for the solidification of the legal landscape around AI. I think in last month's episode with Kimberly, she talked about how there's over 250 court cases right now, all about how you can use AI to kind of train different things. Is it a human work if you only wrote the prompt but not the work itself? All these fun questions that will legally need to have answers for us to be able to effectively use these tools in everyday life. A lot of them are going to be answered in this year in 2026. So excited to see where the courts land on a lot of those questions.
Wow, that's super interesting. I think from my perspective, I'm excited about sort of the advent of legal agents. You know, the agents that are going to, I mentioned this earlier, but I mean, the ability to have a front door agent that is kind of guards my front door and can pick off a lot of the relatively routine things, and for other parts of the company that have deployed similar agents that do similar things are reporting something like 80% plus what they call quote unquote deflection rates for inquiries that come in that are able to be handled through this automated tool. I think that's exciting. I'm looking forward to deploying those within the department and then just seeing how they work and working to refine them and make them better.
I'm so glad mine is different. We didn't overlap. Mine is going to be connecting the enterprise through contract data, very contract centric, what I'm looking at. And the reason is, for years now, we have been talking about the importance of contract data feeding the entire organization, HR leveraging it, finance leveraging it, all the different departments. And for most companies, that has still been largely theoretical.
Yeah.
They have the ability to do it. They don't quite get to take full advantage of it, just starting in the last few years. I think this is going to be a year where, with us as part of Workday in particular, we're going to start to see that materialize a lot more meaningfully, and we're going to see the ROI that brings to the different departments.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Hal, this was an incredible episode. Great way to kick off 2026. Rich, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I mean, first of all, congratulations on the success of this. It's been pretty remarkable to see what you've accomplished over the past year, and thank you for allowing me to be a small part of it.
Appreciate that. And anytime. Great to have you here with us.
Great.
Meeting of the Minds, the Legal AI podcast, is brought to you by Workday Contract Lifecycle Management, powered by Evisort AI. To learn more about Workday CLM and how we can help you contract better with AI, visit workday.com and click Legal.
You can find Meeting of the Minds wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to click subscribe so you won't miss any future episodes.
On behalf of Rich, Memme, and myself, and everyone here at Workday, thanks for tuning in.